Hello, everybody. This is the third episode of my office hours that I'm doing once a month, answering Q&A questions and other various things. I'm also going to head off with a slightly different, or a segment while I'm waiting for questions to come in. But I just want to announce here that because of unrelated things, that's not related to the coming election, it's very unlikely that I will be doing one in April. So the April one, any questions that occur in April will be answered in May. I've decided that there is enough engagement in these that I'll keep doing them, but there will not be one in April for unrelated reasons that I will announce later. But for now, I'm not going to announce them. So the other thing I want to call attention to, I don't know if this goal is outrageous or not, but I have set a stream goal for this stream. If I get 10 super chats of the teal tier or higher, that's whatever YouTube calls it, I will run another federal election poll that will be published before the debates come out. Now, most of the time, or some of the time, the polls are mostly free for me because I've already done a lot of groundwork to get people on my mailing list. But because of the election and I want more accuracy, I am running ads. That does cost me money. I'm not just going to do it for funsies right now. I will be doing at least one more after the debates, but if you want one before the debates, you gotta hit that stream target. Well, we're playing with it. I don't know how realistic this stream target is, but we're playing with it. With that, let us touch on the main segment I want to touch on here before I go answer questions. And that is, I think it is... Here we go. It is the results of my March 2025 federal election poll. So this was conducted from the 17th to the 24th of March. I got 1,082 respondents. The way my polling ends up working out, that I pretty much only get decided or very high confidence voters in. So though usually if someone responds to my survey, they're a decided voter. They're going to vote for somebody. So very little of the time that the people who respond to the survey are dropped from the survey. Sometimes it happens, but it's pretty rare. So what we're seeing here with my data, and we saw it with all sorts of data everywhere else from most other pollsters right now, is the Liberals are up a lot. 11.5 points. Now, what's notably different from my polling is showing, and what a lot of polls have shown, is I actually have the Conservatives flat. Yeah, they're up about 0.2, but they've been around 43% plus or minus 1 in the entire time I've been polling, pretty much. And at least of decent sample size federally. So instead, it's not so much that the Liberals, so the Conservatives have lost ground to the Liberals. There is a consolidation of the general left behind Mark Carney and behind the Liberal Party. Notably, the NDP's lost nearly half its vote share. The Greens have lost about a third. The Bloc has lost about a quarter. And that has been the thing propelling the Liberals to the front here. Now, some of this other vote and some of this PPC vote, I mean, that's pretty small, but that's probably went to the Conservatives, and the Conservatives probably or have indeed lost a few voters to the Liberals. But the voter gains they've had have more than compensated for the voters they've lost to the Liberals. We'll get into that here. So this is what I have for... Sorry if it's a little fuzzy for the viewer screens, because I have to blow it up so you can actually see the numbers very well, because resolutions and all that stuff, but... oh, pardon me. So we see the national situation across the board. It's pretty similar along for the Liberals that most other pollsters are showing, with the exceptions of Ontario and Atlantic. In Ontario, I have the Liberals a little lower, and in Atlantic, I have them a lot lower. Now, personally, as someone from Nova Scotia, I really do think that the Liberal polling numbers in Atlantic Canada are just wrong. I don't know why the pollsters are reporting numbers like 50, 60% for the Liberals, but no evidence I've seen on the ground, talking to people, seeing people, having access to information that you guys do not have access to, polling myself, I just don't see it it's not impossible. It could happen, but I'm really skeptical. And the other thing that my poll is notably different on is particularly, again, Ontario and Atlantic for the Conservatives. That's the main differences. And in that regard, there are differences in the Conservatives' favorable direction. Now, you are more than welcome to cast doubts or have your own thoughts or whatever, but this is just the honest-to-goodness results that have occurred. And this is kind of what the deal is. So the Conservatives still have a slight lead in Ontario, about 4-ish points, 4.5, and about a 5-point-ish lead to the Atlantic. And that's down from last month in Atlantic, but it's up in Ontario for the Conservatives, and the Liberals have gained pretty much everything across the board. Now, the most interesting one, I was really, really skeptical about the Quebec sample when it first came out, with the the Conservatives at 27, the Liberals at 37-ish. But you look at a lot of the other polls coming out, like Main Street, Liaison, even Abacus or Leger, and those have the Conservatives in a very similar position. So I'm kind of in the position now that I think I might be correct with this Quebec sample, which surprises me because if you see my weightings here below, Quebec is really under quota in the raw data, only 107 respondents. But it is what it is. The normal thing I would do to get more Quebec respondents is to run a video about Quebec, and I can't do that right now because of the time crunch of only 1 week to do the poll. And the reason why that helps is because I find a lot of Quebecers care more about provincial politics than they care about federal politics, so they're more likely to click on a video about Quebec than they are to click on a video about Canada Federal. So that is what it is. Age-wise and sex polarization-wise, we're seeing pretty much exactly what we'd expect for the Conservatives. Much stronger with the men, much weaker with the women. Strongest with middle-aged, weakest with the old people, relatively strong with the young. And the Liberals we're kind of seeing, again, what we'd expect. Strongest with young people and the old people, weak with middle-aged. My only concern I have for my own data quality here is the Liberals being at 35 with females but 38 with males seems dubious to me. I think that there is some possible noise here because my female sample is only 132 raw respondents. Now, I am weighted it up, obviously, to the proportional amount to the census data, but upweighting does not remove artifacts of low sample size. So the margin of error is still quite high in practice here. So the Liberals might be a little higher nationally than this poll is projecting, or potentially a little lower, depending on which sample you trust more. I personally trust the male sample more, so I think the Liberals are probably slightly better than my poll projects, but not a lot. I would expect the Liberals to be tied with men and women, so like 38-38 kind of thing. That's my expectation. The NDP here, I forgot to mention the NDP up here. The NDP is doing awful. In Ontario, they're down to 4%. Quebec, they're down to 6%. Atlantic, Saskatchewan, Alberta, they're just barely at 12%. Their only province they're doing remotely decent in is Manitoba, and it's bad. It's really bad, 16%. This is at a position where it's very plausible and reasonably likely that the Liberals will lose all of their seats. The NDP will lose all of their seats. One momento here. I should have had this up, but I did not. Pardon me. Doing things on the fly? Oh my gosh. Could you imagine Bagel doing this on the fly? Yeah, so if I run these through my model, this polling data through my model, I get the NDP with just 3 seats. The Greens have 0, and it's a Conservative majority of 175 to 139. So a very, very narrow, very, very small majority. I might post a map at some point, I might not. Doesn't really matter to me, honestly. And I'll just want to shout out once again, because we have more people in the audience. If I get 10 super chats in this stream, I will run another poll before the debates occur. If I do not, I'm not going to spend the money on it. 10 super chats, by the way, does not cover the cost of me running a poll, but that's the number I'm picking because I don't think I can get more. Though I can tax deduct all these expenses, so, don't worry about it. It's just coming out of the rest of the YouTube income. So we have here for income cross tables. Again, as expected, the Conservatives do better with richer voters. The Liberals do better with poorer voters. The NDP, Greens, to a certain extent the Bloc, and to a certain extent the PPC, you don't really see much variation between them just because their sample size is really small. 2.1 to 2 doesn't really seem like a really big difference at that point, but if you were to blow that up to like 21.5 to like 19.5, it's a little closer. It's a little more variation. So variation kind of blooms as you gain more votes, kind of thing. Across, for education tables, my high school and college numbers, college being like trade schools and like associate's degrees and other kind of non-university, like non-bachelor degree post-secondaries. My numbers track pretty much what everyone else is showing. The big difference that I have is that I have university voters dramatically more, and that's bachelor, master's, graduate degrees kind of thing, like doctorates kind of stuff, and professional degrees like lawyers or something. Here I have the Conservatives much better than a lot of other pollsters do. If you look at Main Street, or you just decide to humor yourself and you look at Ecos, they have the Liberals a lot stronger with university grads. I don't really know how or why I have this difference with those two pollsters, but we can't say it's sample size artifact because I have a sample of 559 people. It might be possibly related to like age biases to a certain extent, because you can see my sample for old people's way below quota and my sample for young people's way above quota, but that is weighted, so that is the weights are affecting it here. So this isn't just that it's disproportionately young, like this is weighted appropriately. So I don't know. I trust my data, so I don't know what they're doing to get different numbers. Maybe it's just a matter of online versus telephone gets you different responses. Hard to say. And the final big thing to talk about here in this poll is this is the across the top here we have how they voted and how people voted in 2021, and across the left here we have what they're voting now. And as you can see, the Liberals lost 14% of their votes to the Conservatives. The NDP lost 13%. The Bloc lost 8.5%. The PPC's lost 45%. And 63.5% of new voters are voting Conservative, which is quite substantial. The Liberals, though, this is where the big difference is. In my last poll, this back in January, the Conservatives were at like 98, 99% retention, and they've actually lost 6%. But they've gained stuff from the Bloc, they've gained from the PPC, and they've gained a little bit from the NDP, I believe. You can check my Substack if you want to see the differences. And the other big difference is the NDP is collapsing. This was like roughly 15% before, and now it's 35.7% of NDPers are going Liberal. This is 2021 NDPers. The majority, there's more NDP voters defecting Liberal, defecting Conservative, than there are NDP voters staying NDP. That's quite striking. The Bloc's also seen a lot of people bleeding to the Liberals here as well. And the other big difference is there's actually more new voters backing Carney than there was Trudeau. So the percentage for the Conservatives went down, but the absolute number of new voters is roughly on par with what it was in January. Like the same ballpark. But there's a lot more new voters in general because a lot of them are now voting Liberal. And I will reiterate to people who have not seen my polling before, I have checked. My data is mostly random. The amount of people who I can't like directly correlate that this person is this person because I obviously don't attach emails unless people voluntarily give me their email. But even excluding people who voluntarily give me their email, you can look at like the demographic triggers, and the amount of overlap between two polls is actually pretty low. There's some, obviously, because I'm pulling from my YouTube audience, from my Twitter audience, from my mailing list. But it's actually quite low. So yeah, so that's how my polls went here. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm very happy with the sample size. I'm quite happy with the distribution here. I'm close that I might split the Atlantic at some point into sub-regions. My only issue is if I do that, then I'm going to basically have to drop PEI like I dropped the territories. Because there's just not enough data for it. And actually, during this poll, I literally had no one from the territories respond to this poll. Which is why it's not even listed. There's no one from Yukon, Nunavut, or Northwest Territories who responded. So there's just sample size of 0. I had people from PEI respond. I believe it's 5. But 5 is not enough to do this. I really need a minimum sample of something like 30 to want to have a province broken out. It's probably a little more in reality, but I'll accept 30. 43 is honestly a little light, but I don't like combining Manitoba and Saskatchewan because they're very different provinces. Like, we can just see this in their vote. Like, these are very, very different numbers. And there is differences, of course, in the Atlantic, but it's not as big as, say, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. Even in 2019, 2021, the difference between Manitoba and Saskatchewan is very large. The difference between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia is not that big. Now, going on to the next stage, because that is covered my poll here. So we're going to start touching on Q&A questions. So starting with member question. And this... One momento. Is it this screen that I should be using? Aha. There we go. Don't know why that was being weird. Technical difficulties in a stream? Wow, crazy. Anyways, I'm just going to drink before I read this. So, from GJL Rocco 97, we actually did lose a decade from Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party of Canada. If we and somehow Mark Carney and the LPC wins the next election, could we see Canada split up? If we elect the Conservatives with Pierre Poilievre, you think they will do what they are saying, and more to fix this great nation? From your point of view, where are the areas you think Canada needs to be fixing? So this is a big question, and this is a complicated question. So we're going to tackle it in parts. So the first part, if Carney wins, I think there is a risk of Canada splitting. I don't want to say, like, firm on the record, like, it would split or whatever. But there is a lot of rumblings in Western Canada of people being very dissatisfied with the status quo. And I think another election loss would just exacerbate that. Would that actually metastasize into separatism? I can't really say. But it's not going to be good. Maybe it will just turn into a nothing burger. Maybe it will turn into a referendum. It's really hard to say, especially depending on how the rest of Canada and the government reacts to Trump's tariff threats. If we continue doing as we are right now, where there's nothing too drastic, nothing too extreme, it'll probably be fine. But I really fear if we see something really bold, like an export tariff on oil, which would disproportionately affect the West, that might cause a lot of alienation, and that would be dangerous. But I do think, barring the potential threats from the US, if they're true or fake, I don't necessarily think Carney would cause Canada to split up, but I think there is a potential if he doesn't govern well. If he governs like Trudeau again, that could be a problem for Canada. If he governs like he's claiming he's going to govern, it might not be as bad. But how much can you trust a politician in the writ period, regardless of their color? The next question here is, if we elect the CPC with Pierre Poilievre, you think they will do what they are saying and more to fix this great nation? So the first thing here is, Poilievre should do those things. Will he do those things is a whole nother question altogether. I don't really like speculating on if someone will do something or if they won't do something, because I don't know. But there is very little chance that Poilievre will get reelected in 2029, assuming he wins this election, if the economy's not growing or if housing isn't getting better, even directionally, if we are stuck in another 5 or 4 more years of zero net growth, the Conservatives won't win re-election unless the Liberals are just that bad at campaigning. So it just seems unlikely to me that they will do nothing. I think on average they will increase the success of Canada. The question of the election is, it'll be better than the Liberals or not. I'm personally of the opinion that probably was probably going to do better, just because a lot of the Liberals have been the same people who presided over the last 10 years where it did bad. And there's really no reason to see why that should do better again. That's just from an objective standpoint. I do have personal political opinions, but I try to keep them more objective on this YouTube channel. As objective as you can be, to a degree. And the last part here is, from your point of view, where are the areas in Canada that needs fixing? So the first one is housing. Now, the main part of housing is really the reduction of immigration. It's just impossible for us to build, to handle the increase in population growth, especially through immigration. Immigration puts a lot more stress than natural births cause on housing stocks because it's a very artificial type of population growth. And the other big factor, too, would be the economy. I mean, this is kind of self-explanatory, but the economy hasn't grown. People are struggling, especially the middle class isn't doing so hot. Because things like housing, gas, cars, food, core essentials to just function in modern Canadian society have gotten really expensive in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, you could buy a used car for a relatively good price, like $10,000. I mean, when I bought my first car in 2020, the used car for that type in good condition that was 10 years old was selling for $10,000. Now, I could resell my current car with something like 50,000 kilometers on it for almost the same as sticker price. It would be like 5,000 less than the sticker. That's not a thing that would happen in the past. Like 10,000 would be really good condition car 10 years ago. And now it's your 5-year-old used car is only a little cheaper than a brand new one. Stuff like that cause a lot of stress. And those are things that we really need to fix if we want Canada to be a thriving, healthy nation. Like, people should be able to afford to buy the basics of what we expect today. Now, moving on to regular questions asked over the course of the last month. Starting with Prez Alex Witt. In your opinion, which Canadian political parties, federal or provincial, are most similar / share the largest voter base with the Republican or Democratic parties of the United States? What would you consider to be the largest difference between those political parties and the Republican and Democratic Party? So, I'm not going to go through every single party that exists. That would take way too long, because there's like 40 of them. But I'll just touch federal, because it's poignant at the time. So, in general terms, so we'll start, roughly speaking, left to right. The Greens in Canada correspond pretty heavily with the U.S. Green Party, plus or minus a little bit. There's pretty heavy overlap. When there is no Green candidate in the U.S. spectrum, the Green voter in Canada would probably stay home. They might vote Democrat, but they'd probably stay home. The next would be the NDP. The NDP would pretty much just be the left wing of the Democrats, but they wouldn't be the uniform left wing. They would be like the Labour left wing. They would be the radical social progressive left wing. So the NDP itself is a coalition right now, because of things doing, of Labour types and these university urbanite progressives. These two hate each other, by the way. This is a very uneasy coalition, which is why it's falling apart, as I discussed in my poll, as all the polls right now are showing. It's a very uneasy, very unstable coalition. But this coalition are both two core factions of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is basically woke university progressives, the labor vote, the unionized voter, upper middle class, affluent people, immigrants. Those kind of things are the people who usually vote the Democrats. Then you also have things like the black vote. A lot of Hispanics vote Democrat. That's a little less these days. So there's that kind of thing. That's like the Democratic Party. The Liberals, they're composed of roughly 3 factions. It's factions within left-wing parties is a little overselling it for the most part, because that's not really how they work. But the Liberals in Canada have roughly 3 factions. You have kind of like the orange liberal, for lack of a better name, and that's the more urbanite, left-wing progressivist type person. They're probably they're like very socially liberal, if you will. Then you have the liberal, which is liberal, and then you have the blue liberal, which are closer to the neoliberals in ideology. All the first 2 of those factions, the orange liberal, will be like the center of the Democratic Party, maybe the center left of it. The liberal would be we're going to say center left of the Democratic Party for the orange liberal, center of the Democratic Party for the liberal, and the neoliberal blue liberal faction would be the right wing of the Democratic Party. So the Liberal Party in Canada would span the left, center, and right of the Democrats. And on average, is actually probably to the right of the Democrats on a lot of issues. But otherwise, it's left on a lot of issues. For example, it's left of the Democrats on healthcare. Almost no Democrats are going to support universal healthcare. Pretty much a dead issue. Same thing with pharmacare. Like, that's not a thing the Democrats will ever vote for. They didn't do it when Obama had a supermajority. They're not doing it now. But on other issues, like social issues, despite a lot of Canadians thinking this, the Democrats are to the left of the Liberals on pretty much every single social issue that you can name. Almost every single one of them. Going on to the right still, the Conservatives would be almost uniformly the left wing of the Republican Party. So you would see people like a lot of like, it's kind of hard to say this because none of the people in the Conservative Party would ever have political power in the US. Like, name a Canadian politician. Like, Poilievre, for example, might be able to have, like, a position in Congress or something. But there's no chance he'd ever be a senator in the Republican Party. There's almost no chance he'd be a senator. Because most Canadian Conservatives are to the left of the Republicans on pretty much everything on economics. And certainly everything on social values. The Republicans campaign on restricting abortion, for example. And the Conservatives in Canada will never do that. At least, have never done that in my lifetime. But I would say, on average, now, in this current moment where the US and Trump is threatening Canada, things are different. But if we were in a peaceful, magical world where Canada and the US were one country, and there was no violence and there was no bad blood, most conservatives would probably end up voting some level of Republican. That's just how it works out to be. You don't really see right-wingers in Canada. They're not going to vote left-wing in Germany. They're not going to vote left-wing in the UK. They're not going to vote left-wing in Italy or Spain. They're going to usually vote for another right-wing party. Will they turn out as much? Hard to say. I mean, turnout in the US is pretty low, so almost certainly they won't turn out as much. But I would say most of the Conservatives' brand is going to fall pretty close to the Republicans. The red Tory, and I mean that in the true sense of red Tory, not in like the stupid sense that we use now where red Tory is just a blue liberal, but in the Conservative Party. A red Tory as in pro-spending but socially conservative, those people would probably not vote very often. That would be the kind of voter that Trump was courting in 2024 that put him over the edge. The working class white guy, if you will, falls heavily into that red Tory camp, even if philosophically they're not red Tories, because the average person doesn't have a very sophisticated political ideology, because there's no point. There's almost no point in a politically active person having a very sophisticated political ideology. It almost never matters. People mostly do it for fun, but yeah. And then finally, we'll hit on the PPC. They would be like the libertarian right of the Republican Party, possibly the Libertarian Party itself, and the Bloc has no correspondence. It doesn't make sense to consider it in the U.S. context. The Bloc is a French conservative party. It doesn't have any analogy in the U.S. Not one. I have no idea who they would vote for, because there is no analogous scenario in the U.S. where there are French people who have a national identity who vote for things. It doesn't exist in the U.S. Like, yeah, there's the Cajuns and there's some French Canadians in like Maine and New Hampshire, but they're so small that it doesn't matter. Next question here I have from Dan the Man 189. Can someone explain how the Liberals are possibly benefiting from the tariff thing? They have failed to resolve the situation, therefore they gain 15%? I don't get it. So this sounds more complicated than it is. So basically, what Trump's doing with the tariffs and with the annexation threats is he is scaring Canadians. That's what he's doing. And when people are scared about foreign policy issues, the first reaction for the average person who doesn't consume politics obsessively, is not super politically active, is to want to preserve the status quo. Because when foreign policy is the main issue, people don't want to change government. That's why the adage, start a war to win re-election, is a thing. Because if there's a foreign war going on, people are less likely to want to vote for a new government. As there's a bigger issue right now. But it is. And the other part of this too is not only has it scared a lot of very non-political people, and that's why they're supporting the Liberals in polls right now, is it's scaring specifically the NDP voter. There's a reason why that the NDP is at, where is it? Where they are losing 36% to the Liberals right now. That's happening because NDPers are terrified that the US is going to annex Canada or is threatening to attack Canada or undermine Canada in some way or shape or form. Because to the NDP, Trump and the Republican Party is like the radical extreme right, because we don't really have in Canada anything that is like the median Republican in rightwardness. No one is that right-wing in politics in Canada. Voters, for sure. Politicians, there is not. So a lot of NDPers are rallying behind the Liberals right now in the face of what they perceive as a national security emergency. That's the trick for Carney there, though, is that's a very unstable position, because if voters realize that this threat is over, or it's not a very big deal, or that there's more important domestic issues, they'll leave in a heartbeat. The question here is, will Trump maintain will maintain the status as a very salient issue for New Democrats? Will it be the most salient issue for them? If it is, they're going to vote Liberal. If Trump falls off because, I don't know, he just stops talking about Canada for a month, that might change. Going on to the final question I have here, and I'll answer questions in chat. Once again, calling out, if I get 10 super chats, I will do another poll before the debate. Unrealistic expectation? Potentially. But, well, we're trying it out. We're trying it out here. This is from Sasquatch FF1PJ. Apparently, Carney is not attending the French debate. If so, how does that affect Liberal outlook in Quebec? So this is a tricky question, because the debate might get cancelled. And if the debate is cancelled, it's probably a pretty minor hit to Carney. However, the big wrinkle would be if the debate is cancelled and then Carney bombs it in the Radio Canada debate, That would be really bad for him in Quebec. Like, really, really bad. Now, if he goes to this TVA debate, and he bombed that, and then he bombed the Radio Canada debate, that would also be really, really bad. So, it's kind of the situation for Carney here, where it actually kind of makes sense that he pulled out of the French debate for TVA. Because there's really no upside. Because every time we've seen Carney speaking French, he can read canned statements in a reasonable facsimile of French. Basically, his French skill appears to be about as good as my French skill. I can read a canned statement. I cannot answer your question in French. That's it. I cannot reply to you, but I can read a canned statement. And that seems to be where Carney's French is. He's not very good at answering things on the fly. He's not going to be good at debating based on everything we've seen about him vis-a-vis French. So he's clearly pulled off or backed off on this entirely because he doesn't have very good French. And that might end up, in the more metaphysical sense, really hurting him in Quebec because he won't be able to communicate his ideas very well to Quebecers. 53% of Quebec doesn't speak English very well. Either zero or to less than bilingual standard. For example, I speak French, but I'm not bilingual at all. I'm not fluent. And a lot of Quebecers are going to be the same with English. I'm not sure how much, but some. And of the 47% of Quebec who does speak English fluently, how many of them consume media in English? How many of them listen to politics in English, read about politics in English? A lot of them won't. A lot of them will read and listen in French. So if there is no sound bites or there's no articles or discussion from Carney in French, they're not going to hear it because they're not listening to it. They're listening to French media. Now, is that everyone? No, by all means. And there's also, certainly, as Jack Dirty in the chat just points out, a lot of Quebecers who listen to English media. But there are some, many in fact, who don't. Now, getting on to questions from the chat. We're going to go reverse chronological order. Let's see. What is the first good question to have here? Okay, from GLJ Rocco 97. I guess I can take this down over here. Ooh. So, your poll result gives the PPC 3% in this election. Could we see the same thing with CPC as the NDP? Voters going to Liberals to not split the vote. Will it be more than half being goes? No, I don't think the PPC... I think the PPC is pretty close to its floor. Now, its actual floor in polling is probably higher than its actual poll in voting. Because a lot of PPCers, based on 2021 and 2019... just don't bother voting. They answer polls. They don't bother voting, though. So while I have like 3% in my poll here, I fully expect the PPC to get like 2. Maybe less. Because they just don't seem to vote when it comes to the hammer and the anvil. They just don't vote. And that's a really big issue you find with a lot of like libertarian-leaning parties is libertarians in general have a really weak relationship with electoral politics. They seem to be really hesitant to like engage in it in any meaningful fashion or any effective fashion. The kind of organization and hierarchical structure necessary to run a political party seems too abhorrent to them, so they don't really do it. And that's their downside. And so in that regard, I don't think we're going to see many more PPCers defect to the Conservatives. I think the Conservatives have won all of the winnable PPCers, and the rest are a combination of like former Libertarian voters and people who are voting PPC because of Bernier. And there might be some more libertarianish types who are voting because the PPC is more popular, kind of thing. Next question here, also from GJL Rocco 97. Will Bloc come back because Carney is just terrible in French speaking after French debate? Historically, the Bloc usually does do better following the French debate, especially under Blanchette, because Blanchette's actually a really good debater. I mean, relatively speaking. I would grade the French debate, but my French is bad. Like, it would take me way too long to watch that debate and to understand what's going on to give grades. But in French, Blanchet's a pretty good debater. He's not bad in English either, by the way, which is quite impressive because that's the second language. But yeah, usually the blocks seem to do better after the debate because that's really going to put things into focus and it's going to really give Blanchett a chance to shine. It might give Poilievre a chance to shine. I'm not going to go out here and say this is going to happen. But with the Conservatives polling quite high in Quebec, it's not entirely unreasonable to expect they might end up doing really well in Quebec, and they could be polling in like the 30%, 40% range on election day in Quebec. And if they start getting above 35%, they really start picking up seats. But from 18, which is what they got in 2021, and 25% or 35%, in that 17 points, there's really only like 4 seats that they can win. So right now, that 27% in my poll is pretty worthless, but if they pull that up to like 35, it starts being worth a lot. Next question here from Josh Van. Hey, I was thinking about the polls and how some people are more willing to answer polls. Is that accurate? I'm specifically asking about the party's voters are more likely. What party's voters are more likely? So that's a question that's going to depend. Like, the answer to that depends on how you're polling and how you're sampling. And those are not necessarily related. So polling method, like online, like I'm doing, or telephone, or IVR, or what Main Street's doing these days, which is text message to an online poll, that's going to give you different answers than a different sampling than online is. Now, pros and cons that there's I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I would actually say hybrid is probably the best because the biases online has and the biases telephone has tend to counteract each other. But inside that, you're going to get different kinds of biases. So with telephone polls, you're going to get biased towards the most enthusiastic voters. So if, let's say, the Liberals are really enthusiastic right now, they will get overperforming on telephone polls unless the telephone poll is really well weighted. So I'm not going to say right now that all IVR polls are going to overstate things. That's not necessarily true. Some firms are better than other firms. But that is if you will, that is the bigger risk with telephones. It's going to risk to oversample the enthusiastic voter. Whereas in an online poll, it's going to risk to overestimate the voter who joins the online panel, which is usually pretty dedicated, usually younger, usually more white-collar jobs will join online panels. Because a lot of blue-collar jobs, like, for example, I just had people on today installing canners at my house. Those guys, when they're working, they're doing things. They're not going to be playing around and fiddling on their phone with a poll. My job is a white-collar job, and there are times at my job where I'm actually not doing anything because I'm waiting for something to happen. And if I wanted to, and I was allowed to, complicated, but anyways, I could have answered a poll if I wanted to. So there's some differences there. You especially see this with like fishermen, because a lot of fishermen during fishing season will not answer polls at all because they're busy. They're on a boat that probably doesn't have cell reception. Or if it does have cell reception, they're not answering their phone to respond to a poll. Next question here we have from Ronnie Bebby? Ronabib? I don't know how to pronounce that. Anyways, know what happens if nomination deadlines aren't met. Now, a candidate needs to be assigned. They need 150 electors, apparently. I'm in Vancouver, Kingsway, and don't have representatives yet. The short answer is no, I don't really know what happens if, like, in the end there. And the reason that is because it depends on the party. Like, for example, the Liberals or Conservatives, as long as they have, say, a local EDA, which I believe they have in every single riding, the people in that EDA are just going to throw up one of themselves as a sacrificial lamb if it comes to it. They're not going to let no seat happen. So the short answer, to loop back to it, I don't really know because it depends on the party, how they're organized and such. But in a more general sense, if something were to let's say you have a candidate nominated, and that candidate, for whatever reason, they die, they resign, they hit a scandal or whatever, and they are no longer the candidate after the nomination deadline, the party will not field anyone in that riding. That happened in 2021 in Dartmouth Cole Harbour. For various reasons that I don't recall, the Conservative candidate had to drop out of Dartmouth Cole Harbour. And then there just wasn't a Conservative nominee in 2021 in Cole Harbour. Sorry, Dartmouth Cole Harbour. There was no one there. Next question we have is from Red Coat. I'm going to take a drink first, though. Okay, sorry. Do you think that the NDP can ever recover from this election if the polls hold as they are? Might they be cursed to become as relevant as the Greens? No, the NDP's dead. If the NDP gets 0 seats or close to it, they're dead. And the reason for that is you have to think to yourself, what is the purpose of a political party? Now, a lot of people will tell you the purpose of a political party is to represent ideas to people. That's not true. They might say, oh, well, a political party is representing the people, or the ideas that the people have. That's also not true. The political party serves as a vehicle for some influential faction in society to try to get things they want done. If that political party does not get seats in government, does not get power, does not get, I don't even just mean winning elections, like getting committee seats, getting votes in the House of Commons, getting media time, there's not going to be backers for it. Now, traditionally, prior to Jagmeet Singh, the core client group of the NDP was the unions, private, public sector unions. Singh, because he's really incompetent, he's genuinely a really bad politician, gave the middle finger to his primary backer, his main interest group that was supporting him, and started chasing after an interest group that doesn't support him, which is the urbanite progressive. That person's not going to vote NDP on average or in meaningful number because they can vote Liberal and get the same thing. The union backer, back under Jack Layton, back under Ed Broadbent, back under Tommy Douglas, the union backer wasn't really getting what they want from the Liberals or the Conservatives. I mean, just to give one example, the Liberals quash protests just as much as strikes just as much as the Conservatives quash strikes. So a lot of these unions were not really super happy with the NDP, the Liberals. And that's why the NDP exists. Now, back in Tommy Douglas's day, there was also some stuff about farmers in there. But the Conservatives have pretty heavily co-opted the farmer base. Possibly because the NDP has kind of abandoned the farmer base, but regardless of why, the NDP's lost farmers. And then they were left with unions, and they've thrown away unions. So if they lose this election, and they lose almost all of their seats, or all of their seats, depending on projections, it's hard for them to come back because there's really no reason for these backers to back them anymore. So they'll have really hard time getting funding. They'll have a really hard time getting volunteers. They'll have a really hard time getting media attention or anything. If the union backers, as we're seeing right now in this election right now, are going to back the Conservatives or they're going to back the Liberals. We've seen the Boilermakers Union, for example, endorse the Conservative Party. That's pretty rare. I don't remember the last time a public or a Canadian union endorsed the Conservative Party of Canada. They've endorsed Doug Ford, sure, But the Conservative Party of Canada, I don't recall the last time this ever happened. So that's the real danger for the NDP. Like, they lose these voters, and the urbanite progressive they've been chasing is going to look at them and it's like, well, do we vote for the party that is going to split the vote or the party that's going to win the election? And they're going to vote Liberal. Because the realities of de Verger's law tell us that if a voter has two options that they are okay with, they will vote the one that's more likely to win. The only reason the NDP has managed to survive for 70 years in a first-past-the-post electoral system is there are specific ridings in Canada that are really heavily composed of one demographic of person, being it union voters, be it working class, blue collar guys. Those are not necessarily the same group, by the way. And they were overwhelmingly composed of those people, so they could win those ridings. But without those ridings, or without that backing, there's no one that can win. And that's the problem the Greens have. The Greens, for my entire lifetime, have only ever won seats because of star candidates. There is no natural Green seat in the entire country of Canada. Provincially, federally, anywhere. No seat is a natural Green seat. Kitchener Centre was won federally by accident because the Liberals dropped their candidate because of various reasons. The Saanich Islands was won because May was like a star candidate and there's some goofiness with the Conservative cabinet minister of the region at the time. And that's it. That's the only seats that the Greens have won currently. The Nanaimo Ladysmith was also kind of a fluke. They only had it for like 2 elections, and now they're distant fourth. They won Fredericton, but that was also kind of by accident. It was a 3-way race. They had a really good, relatively speaking, candidate. And then as soon as Jenica Atwin changed seats, the Greens collapsed in Fredericton in 2021. And they're going to do even worse in this election in Fredericton. This is the same problem with the PPC, by the way. PPC has no natural seats in this entire country because the PPC represents no power. They represent no elite groups. They represent no major clients. And that's almost on purpose because Bernie doesn't actually want to win elections. He wants to be paid to talk about politics, pretty much. Next question. Let's see, where is it? My chat refreshed. I hate that. Okay, next question is here from Juicy Berry. What do you think would happen if Carney doesn't attend the TVA debate? But the debate goes ahead anyways with the Conservatives, NDP, Bloc, and Greens. If that does happen, if the TVA debate happens, all other four parties with seats are there, Carney will get smashed. He will lose a lot of support in Quebec because it'll be really quite embarrassing. You'll probably have the entire debate go with every party just bashing the Liberals because they can. The attacks are going to guarantee land because there's no one defending them. And they won't get into... They won't risk sparring with Poilievre because if they lose a clash with Poilievre, they get hurt. If they just dunk on the Liberals, there's no downside. I mean, we've seen this kind of happen back in the English debate from Maclean's in 2019. Trudeau didn't show up, and the entire debate was Singh, the Greens, Bernier, and Scheer just dunking on Trudeau. How damaging that is in the long run, I don't know, but it's not good. It's bad publicity. It's bad results. Next question here is from Dark Triad Shorts Unleashed. Thoughts on the average Canadian's perception of the industrial carbon tax? My econ background has made me a single-issue voter in this regard. I don't think the average voter has any idea what that means, to be honest. The reason why the Conservatives were so successful with getting people to hate the carbon tax has anything to do with whether the carbon tax is good or bad policy. What it's to do is no one understands what the carbon tax does unless you are an economist or like a really interesting nerd, pretty much. who's really interested in like wonky policy stuff. No one knows what it works or what it does. And Qualia was able to successfully convince people that it made things cost more money. That's it. The Liberals were unable to defend it because, in reality, it does make things cost more money. Now, the rationale behind it is it makes things cost more money because the other ways to reduce carbon emissions cost more. But that's a really hard thing to sell to people. And this is the problem with a lot of public policy is what is good policy or not doesn't matter. What matters is can you sell it to people? And the average person just perceives it as this costs me money. Because you actually look at polls on this time and again. Me and Wyatt have discussed it before in podcasts. But time and again, polls will say like the average Canadian is willing to spend like $50 a year on climate change mitigation. And the carbon tax in any form that is worth doing costs more than $50 a year. I mean, just to give a personal example, I mean, I drive a lot, for the record, but I spend almost $500 a year on gasoline for carbon tax. $500 in carbon tax on gasoline. I drive a lot, disclaimer, because I live far away from my office because housing prices. But that's the kind of thing here. Like, that's a lot of money. And a lot of people see the cost of the carbon tax. And sure, you can say rebates and all that stuff, whatever. But the pitch of the rebates is not a great pitch either. It's very hard to buy. People are really skeptical of the idea of, oh, you're going to get more back than when you paid in. Whether that's true or not, people are really skeptical of claims like that from the government. Next question here. This is also from GJL Rocco 97. Does rallies matter of popular vote in this election because conservatives have more than 1,000 people showing up and liberals have under 500 people? So, rallies matter. But rallies don't matter in the sense you think they do. Looking at the crowd size is not super important. What the crowd size tells you, what the rally tells you, is the engagedness of people. Because the conservatives win... Sorry, I'm going to rephrase this. Elections are won primarily on turnout. I say this because most people will have made up their minds well in advance. And if they haven't made up those minds, they're probably not going to vote. So if someone has an opinion, well, let's say NDP, that's their opinion. The next step is to get that person to go actually vote NDP. If they don't actually vote NDP, it doesn't matter. And rallies increase enthusiasm. They rally the base. They make people more confident. And that will make people more likely to turn out. So what we might see is if we go for the rest of this election, a lot of people might turn out who are not being forecasted in polls because the enthusiasm is way higher than people are seeing, but that could also show up in polls. So it's hard to say. Redcoat says, hey Chris, maybe you would be interested in this map I made regarding the US-Canadian political question you had. By all means, if you have something interesting like that, you can send an email to thegreatcanadianbagel@gmail.com and I will look at it. If you've ever emailed me before, because as soon as I said that, I remember that I have to reply to somebody. I'm really bad at replying to emails. That's not because I don't look at them or I don't care about them. I'm really busy in my real life, especially right now with the election. So things get dropped. So if I do not look at your email after you email me, just email me again. Like, just bump it. Just say, hi, I sent this. I'll try to look at it as soon as I can. Another question again from GGL Rocco 97. Do you think after Carney becomes leader of the Liberals, starting election with Trump tariffs, are we seeing a Tory, I assume you mean a shy Tory effect happening in this election? The short answer is yes. I think we are. I think the conservative vote is underestimated right now. I think I'm estimating it correctly, because of course I'm going to say that. I'm not going to downvote my own poll. But I do think people are underestimating, other pollsters are underestimating the Conservatives. Not on purpose. Polling is hard. And voters are flaky. And I think the reason why we're seeing this, Jean-Marc Legere has mentioned this before, Abacus has mentioned this, David Coletto has, other people have. I think the reason for this overestimation is a lot of people are responding to polls saying they'll vote Liberal who probably won't actually vote. They might actually be Liberal voters, but they're you look at the certainty of vote, and they're pretty uncertain to vote. Now, that might change over the course of the election, don't get me wrong, but if that doesn't change, the polls might end up overestimating the Liberals just because a lot of the voters who say they're going to vote Liberal won't actually vote. The next one is from Jack Dirty. I don't know why I said that really weirdly. Anyways, is Canada close to a rupture? I hear a lot of noise from Alberta to split, same with Saskatchewan and Quebec. What is the best solution? The best solution is twofold. The best solution for Alberta, and this is really easy, it's really stupid that we are in a situation where Albertans are feeling alienated enough that separatism is even a thing we're discussing. That's just stupid, because we could fix it. It'd be so easy to fix it. All we need to do to satiate Albertans is build a pipeline from Alberta to St. John, extend the TMX to a place where you can actually put tanker ships on it, maybe build a third pipeline somewhere. Congratulations, you fixed most of Alberta's problem. Most of Albertan separatism arises because the rest of Canada is holding back their ability to sell oil at market prices. The oil we sell to the US ends up going to the... we usually sell it, I believe, at 80 cents to the dollar of what the world market price for our oil would be. And that makes Alberta poorer for literally no reason. Same quantity of oil sold is sold for less money because we cannot sell it at market prices because there's no one else to sell it to. If you can only sell your things to one person, they can basically demand whatever they want if they can buy from more than one person. For Quebec, that's a little more complicated though, because Quebec separatism is really heavily intertwined with nationalism. Because no matter what people want to say, Quebecois are not. They're a distinct group of people. They're distinct. You can go to Quebec. You can go visit Quebec City. And it's not the same as visiting Toronto. I personally really like Quebec City, but it's not the same. It's a different town. But, for that matter, Halifax is notably different than Toronto. I assume Vancouver is notably either. I've never been there. But these kind of things are more pronounced with Quebec than the rest of Canada. I think the easiest solution there is to give Quebec probably a bit more autonomy, and specifically reduce immigration a lot. Immigration is really inflaring a lot of this because it's putting a lot of fear in a lot of the Quebecer elites, because they think that they're going to get annihilated. The French language, the Quebec culture is going to get wiped out because the immigrants coming in are more likely to assimilate to English. That's their argument. Don't know the truth on it. I've not looked into it. But that's their fear. And we could just reduce immigration. And that would solve a lot of the alienation in Quebec. A lot of why Plamondon is gaining a lot of ground in Quebec right now, and the Parti Québécois is gaining a lot of ground, is based on stuff like that. And we could fix that really easily, but we won't. Because our government doesn't do things for some reason. The next question here. James Davidson. How should parties navigate housing crisis effectively when there's a divide of non-homeowners like me wanting to see prices come down and homeowners not wanting their homes to lose value? So the solution there is no good solution. Someone's going to lose, and realistically, I say this as someone who owns a home, but I bought a home when it was at like the most overpriced it could be. So I actually am like the best person to kind of speak on this. Anyways, the reality is homes have to lose value. And they're going to lose value because we need to stop reduced population growth. That's the only meaningful way to do it. There's no way we can build enough houses to satiate demand. We got to reduce demand. The only way to reduce demand is to reduce population growth. The only way to reduce population growth is to reduce immigration. And if we do all those things, the price of my house, for example, which was bought at like the most overpriced point it could be pretty much, that'll probably drop 10, 20%. It'll start growing again after that, but it'll have a big drop immediately when the population stops growing as fast as it did. And that's the only way to solve the housing crisis. And the boomers and other people like myself, I'm 27, so I'm not a boomer by any means, but people like myself and a lot of other people who own homes, they just have to accept that they need a one-time hit to their home value. It'll start growing again after that, because it obviously has to grow again, because we're not going to just, well, maybe we'll end up in a situation like Japan where homes depreciate in value, but that's very unlikely. Our stock deficit is too large. Next question here is from Ryan Zamet. What chance is there of the Conservatives losing the popular vote in your opinion? I think it's almost zero. The polls are showing it right now, but I really think come election day, at least as of time of recording this video, I don't think they can lose the popular vote. I think we're going to see the Conservatives regain ground by April 10th because Carney's honeymoon period will be fading off, and that'll put the Conservatives in first place in popular vote. The question will remain, though, will they be high enough lead to actually win the election? Because the Conservative vote is very inefficient, especially if they're doing like 27% in Quebec. So it can be very easily, the case where the Conservatives win the popular vote by like 7 points, like my poll has it, or 6 points, and then only win the election by like a dozen seats. Let's see. Off-White Salmon. Will we see the greatest political turnaround around in history? Polls aren't the be-all, end-all, of course. From the looks of it, the cons seem pretty. But from the looks of things, the cons seem pretty screwed. I do think we're going to see a big political turnaround. I'm not sure at this stage. I would not want to publicly commit on my YouTube channel that the Conservatives will win a majority. I think they will, perhaps, based on my own polling, but I do not want to commit myself to that. But I do think the polls are going to turn around, and the Conservatives will be in the lead, popular vote-wise. Especially think in Atlantic Canada we're going to see a big swing over the next month in the polls. And we'll probably see the Conservatives gain a lot of seats in Atlantic Canada. Will they gain enough seats in Ontario to win? That's a different question. But they will certainly gain a lot of seats in Atlantic Canada, a lot of seats in BC, some in Manitoba perhaps, definitely some in Alberta. They might gain like the Yukon. They might gain something in Quebec, but we'll see about Ontario. And then my final question I'm going to answer here because we're over time, but I want to answer all the questions in the chat. From Luke Eats Oats. If Jagmeet is ejected from NDP leadership and a new leader tries to reorientate back to their traditional base, do you think there's any chance they can get their base back? So that depends. If that leader has a seat in Parliament or is able to quickly win a seat in a by-election, sure, it's very easy to do that. If they decide to reorientate back to their original base and they run a platform like they need to. But the dangerous thing for the NDP in this election is they might lose all their seats. Or they might lose most of their seats. And they might not have anyone left that they can do that with. So that's the question for the NDP. Can they retain enough seats in this election that they can replace Singh with someone who's better at being a politician? Though knowing the NDP, they're probably going to pick someone just like Singh again because they've done that. Their provincial parties do that all the time. They replaced Horvath with Stiles, and they're basically the same. Sometimes they pick someone different. They replaced Horgan with Eby. They're replaced not only with Nenshi, but oftentimes they just pick the same person again. Well, with that there, I'm going to wrap up the stream. We did not meet the super chat target, but that's what it is. I will be back after the final debate is done, polling, but in the meantime, I will not be polling. Unless, for some reason, I get a whole bunch of, like, super thanks on my videos in the next week. But with that, I bid you guys adieu, and I will see you in the future. Monday.